All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome back to week 9. Today, unfortunately, my QQ is not working, so I have already asked you to speak up if you want to say something today. If I ask you a question, please speak up until I fix the issue with my QQ. Okay, so today we're going to talk about servlets. We've had some brief introduction on servlets on the first 2 weeks. Today we're going to go more into the details of um, how servlets work. We will look into the request and response objects in detail. So, in the last couple of weeks, we talked about a few important topics. Mainly, we spoke about JSP, right? So, the last couple of weeks were mostly about ways to write JSP. So, we know that we can use scriptlets, right? We can use standard action. We can use directives. Um, we can use expression language, right? And finally, we spoke about JSTL, which is the standard tag library. And these are all the ways, all the different technologies by which we can write Java code. And the good thing about these technologies are it doesn't require you to write Java. You can write um, scripts that will be converted by the container to Java code. So those of you who are not very familiar with the syntax of Java, you can use these technologies. We spoke about a Java database, Java JDBC, Java database connectivity as well. How to connect with a database, which is something you're going to do for your for the part 2 of your assignment. Today we're going to discuss servlets again. So with the servlets, we write Java codes, and I think you all remember that servlet is nothing but a Java class that extends a certain class called HTTP servlet that gives it special capabilities. It turns the simple Java class into a servlet class. So let's have a very quick overview of servlets. We will talk briefly about the life cycle, which means how the servlet comes into existence and how it gets destroyed. Then we delve into the two important concepts about HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. So this is what I just talked to you about. This is the class that your Java class will extend in order to become a servlet. And then we talked a great deal about containers in the first couple of weeks. This is just a review about that. And you can think about a container as a starting point, very similar to your main method when you were writing C code or Java code for Windows applications. But as we all know, for web applications, we don't have a main method. With Java web application, we have a container instead that does a lot of work. Um, that allows us to write web applications. So servlet lifecycle, as I said, it's about the time when a servlet comes into existence. It starts to exist and it starts to accept requests and send back responses to the client. There is a very simple example here that once executed will tell us how this life cycle works in a way. So on the top, we have an init method. This is a method that you don't usually override or use in your servlets. There are two versions of this, but this is the first method that the container calls. Okay, so if I run this program, the first thing that gets printed is this statement. Okay, so what gets printed next? So the next time a client runs this, okay, the next time the client runs this, this init method will not be run again, okay, because we have discussed this. Init method will be called only once. So if there are 100 requests for this servlet, init will be run only once, but doGet method will be called every single time. So if there are 100 requests, this message will be printed 100 times. Destroy is only going to be called if we stop the server, if we stop the server manually, for example, or if the server is down or it shuts down, this method will be called. So this is basically the life cycle of the servlet. You can actually write this program by yourself and see how it works. Okay, so because we want to spend some time on request and response objects, let's just review what the request and response contain. Okay, so the three main elements of a request is, first of all, the HTTP method. An HTTP request, the first thing that has is an HTTP method. Okay. Do you remember what HTTP methods do we have? If you want to answer, you need to speak up. If you remember what HTTP methods we have, what are the HTTP methods? So today I need to remind you that please do not text me on QQ. I don't have a QQ today. You need to speak up. Also, if there is any problem during the class, please again speak up and let me know as soon as possible. Okay. So anybody knows what are the HTTP methods? I will tell you the first one is get. Anything else? Do you remember? What is the second HTTP method? Can you guys hear me? Is my voice clear? Guys, I'm asking a question. Can you hear me? Can you hear my voice?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so we have
Head,
we have
head, put, post，还有那
correct.
个什么呀
Correct.
choice，options。
Correct. Thank you. So we have the main ones that we use are get and post. We don't want to talk about the rest. Let's just stick to get and post for now. But this is one of the elements of the request stream. The second thing that a request contains is a URL. Okay, we talked about what a complete URL looks like. It contains the path to the resource we're trying to access. It has the port number of the service we're trying to access. And it starts with HTTP or HTTPS. That is a complete URL. Then we have the foreign parameters, if you guys remember. If, for example, we have a text box or two that we're sending the values of to the server, those will be foreign parameters and those will be contained inside your request stream. Okay, so you can actually access these elements if you have access to the request object in your do-get or do-post methods. On the other hand, we have the response stream. The response stream starts with a status code. I don't know if you remember, we talked about a number of status codes. The one that is widely known by most of you is the status code 404, not found. I think most of you have encountered this status code when a service is unavailable. If the client is typing the wrong URL, let's say, if there's a problem on the client side, you will see this status code. Then we have content type. Content type is a way of telling the browser, telling the client what kind of content you're sending to the client. So if you're sending a text, you will set the content type to text. If it's an HTML, it will be set to HTML, etc., etc. And once you set the content type, then you have the actual content. So these are the three main elements of a stream, of a response stream. Let's look into these request APIs. So API, the programming interface. So here below, down here, we have HTTP servlet request. And you can see that the HTTP servlet request is actually implementing this interface called servlet request. So we have these methods, some of which we have already used. If you remember, we have used get attribute or set attribute. We haven't used this one because really we don't use it that much. I'm going to show you a demonstration of what get input stream does in a few minutes. Again, this one we have used, for example, get parameter to get the form parameters. If we have a form, we have some text boxes, for instance, or check boxes or list or whatever. Those values can be retrieved using using this method called get parameter. Cookies is the subject of next week's class, so we will wait for that. But get header and get input stream, I'm going to demonstrate how they work in a few minutes. We might have talked about these methods before, so we might have some idea of what get does. Get method is used for accessing or simply getting the thing or the resource that you're looking for. Post is very similar to get, with a difference that we have a body in post and we can actually send along parameters with the post method. We can send parameters with the get method as well, but those parameters will be attached to your URL. So if you remember, from the security standpoint, it's not a very good idea to send sensitive or important parameters along with the get method. Head is only asking for the header part of whatever a get returns. So if you only want to access the header part of your get method, then you can use this head method. Trace asks for a loopback of the requested message. So whatever the client, whatever the get receives, actually on the server side, you can view it by using the trace. If you want to do some troubleshooting, for example, using trace might be a good idea. If you doubt what is being received by the server using the get method. Then we have put and delete options connect that we don't use very much. Put is to actually adding something or just putting something on the server side. Deleting a resource or a file, you can use these. Options and connect. If you want to get a list of HTTP methods. And then we have connect. We haven't learned about tunneling. If you study maybe networking or network security, you might get an idea about tunneling, but for our course, we don't really use them. So these are the 8 request method types. So in Java, the way to access these methods is by using doGet, doPost, doPut, doHead, etc. So so far we have seen some examples that basically shows us how to get parameters from the request. But what other things we can get from the request object is the question. And what we're going to look at first is get header. Then there is get method, get session, and cookies. We will look into it next week. So with the get method, if we use the get method from the request object, it's going to return the name of the HTTP method with which the request was made. Okay, so it will either return a get, a post, or put depending on the request. So if it was a get request, get method is going to return get. If it was a post request, get method is going to return just a string post. Okay, as you can see, I'm using a string to store the value returned by get method.
我操，没开过。
Okay, so get session and get cookies will be discussed in the next week, so we don't worry about it now. But let's demonstrate what get input stream and what get head actually does. Just to tell you briefly that with get input stream, we can get the body of your request. Whether it's a post request or a get request, we can get the body of the request. And with the get header, we can get the header of the request. Okay, so let me open my Eclipse. Okay, and we will have a look of how it works. But the syntax is like the one I highlighted here. You use the request object, and you get input stream. So we get the body of the request. Okay. But you don't get the whole request. Okay, so it's not going to give you the header of the request. So let me open my Eclipse right now. We'll open a new project, file new dynamic web project. Let's call this request object demo, which is what we're going to do. We don't need a web.xml, so I'm just going to finish it here. What I want to do in this example is, first of all, I want to create a form. With that form, I want to do a request. I want to send a request to the server using either get, and then I want to use the input string. Then I want to use the input stream to basically retrieve the body of the request. Okay, so let me just add a JSP page to create a form. I'm going to go here, add a JSP file. We will call it form.jsp. Finish it here. What I will have to do next is to add a servlet that will get this request and uses get input stream method to print the body of the request. So right click here, add a servlet. Let's call this servlet display HTTP request. Next. So this is the name of my URL mapping because we don't use web.xml. We use web servlet annotations. Gives you a kind of a long name, the same name as your class. If you want, you can actually change this one. Display can call it HTTP request. Give it a simpler name. And this will be the URL. This will be the resource. This will be your URL mapping that will appear in your URL. Do get, do post, I don't need other methods, so that's fine here. We just need to know the name of the URL mapping. I'm gonna copy it because we will be using it in our form. So let's go back to our form.jsp. Here is where we want to create a simple form. So I'm gonna say form, then we'll have methods, we'll have action. I want to have 2 text boxes, inputs, type, let's say text, let's say name txt. And I'm going to create another input type. So let me copy this one. Text, let's say this one is email. This one, we're going to have a submit button. So this one's will be submit. Submit button. Mail txt. Okay, I think that's fine. The only thing we need to complete here. So because I want to use an input stream, with input stream, we're accessing the body of the HTTP method. And the post method has a body, right? And action is the name that we, oops, sorry. The name, I copied something else, so we lost this name. I'm gonna copy this over here. Okay, so our simple form is complete. I don't need to add anything else. Let's go back to writing our servlets and accessing input stream. So because I use the post, so I'm going to write everything inside do post. The first thing we have to do is we have to create an input stream. So before we can actually use this get input stream, before we can do this, we need to create an object, okay? An object of type input stream. Because input stream returns bytes basically, okay? We cannot store it in a string. Whereas with getWriter, it was different. With input stream, we're getting bytes, so we have to actually define an object from the input stream. We call it in is, let's call it, equals to, let me call it, give it input so input stream. Okay, that's a better name. We haven't imported java.io, so I'm gonna do that. Next, I'm going to create a buffer because it sends you bytes like it doesn't send you the whole byte at once. Okay, so we need to have a buffer. I will create a string buffer, call it XML string, and new string buffer. So I'm going to have to import this one as well. Oh, this one, Okay, this one's fine. We already have this. Then we will have to read bytes one by one. So I'm going to create a simple integer to read the bytes one by one, and then we will have a loop. We say d equals to in dot read until when it's the end of the byte, it sends us a negative number, a negative -1. Okay, so as long as it's not -1, we keep reading. Some problem here in, oh, sorry, input stream. That's what we called it. Okay, there's something wrong with the parentheses. Okay, I have to close this one here. Okay. Now it's fine. Now at whatever it reads, it copies inside D, okay, from the body of the request. And once it reaches the end of the request body, it returns -1. So we keep reading until it reaches -1. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to append it to our string buffer. We say append. And actually, we need to convert this into a character. It's an integer now. So we convert it to character, then we append it. Okay. Next thing we have to do is we have to set the content type, because now we want to display this. So we have read the body of the request. Now what we're going to do is to display it on the browser. So what we have to do is to set the content. Response.set content. Content type, we set it to, what do we set it to? Text HTML. Because we want to basically type HTML. Now what do I need? I need a print writer. Where do I get the print writer? Let's call it out. Where do I get the printout writer? From which object? From response object, right? Get writer. This needs to be imported, right? So I'm going to import this one. Okay, so let's print some HTML println. If you remember, in servlet, we have to print HTML like this, which is not very convenient. That's why often we use JSP to do this. Then what I'm going to do is just to add a break line, and then we print the body of the post request is space, and then I'm going to say XML str.to string, convert it to string. Okay, so let's just have a look. What I'm going to do, actually, I have to close my HTML. So HTML gonna get closed. Oh, sorry, the problem is body has to go first. Body has to get closed first, and then HTML. And finally, I'm gonna close this object. All right, so what we're doing is very simple. Here, I'm reading the contents of the body of the request. Our request is coming from this form as a post request, and we're reading it using get input stream, and stream is going to buffer the content, sending us character by character as bytes. So we read character by character, convert it, and append it to our string buffer. So let's just see if we can get the parameters using this. I'm gonna run this now. I don't need these ones, so finish. All right, so let me just provide some parameters. Iman07@yahoo.com. Submit. Okay, so as you can see, here is the body of our request. It's sending the parameter name and parameter values and everything else. Usually you don't need to use this method because you can use the request.getParameters, because most of the time you only need the values, which is Iman and this email here. As you can see, it's not even converted to ampersand. It's showing the ASCII code. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we want to have a look at the next method from the request object, which is getHeader. So this was the body of the request. Let me actually write some headers to distinguish between the two. I will go back here. So before printing this, I'm gonna say let me just add a header, Hedge2. Here is the body of the post request, and I will add another one. So before closing our out object, I will add another one. So here's the header of the post request. So now what we're going to use is we're going to use request.getHeader. Okay. We get actually first we have to get header names because we don't know the names of headers. Okay, there are plenty of headers in the request method. We don't know the names of them. We know some of the elements, right? We know there is a URL. We know there is the name of the method, right? But there are more headers in a request object. We don't know the names, so I'm just going to use get header names, right? This returns an enumeration, so I'm going to have an enumeration. Enumeration of type string, and we call it all header names equals to request.get. So we just have to import enumeration here, java.util. And then once we have that, we can actually use a while loop to go through all those headers. I'm going to say all header dots. If it has more elements, okay, oops, sorry, has more elements. As long as there are more elements, the loop is going to continue. So what we have, every header has a name and a value. So there are two things that we need to get. So there'll be two strings. First one, we have a header name, okay, which is, we can get it easily from all header names. All header names dot next elements. Next elements will basically give us the name of the header. Then we will have header value, and that one we need to get using the request.get header, this one. And we can actually use this name over here. But one thing you need to be careful is that just make sure that you convert this into string to make sure that the value returned is a string. So now we have both, we can display them. So simply let me copy one of these. Okay, so what we're going to say is header, oops, sorry, header value equals header. Actually, we better put header name first. Header name equals, oops, sorry, Control Z. Header name equals header value. So I think this is it. Is there anything wrong? If you can see any mistakes, please let me know before I run it. So have a look at the code. If you spot any errors, please let me know. So I think I'm doing everything fine. All right, so let's go and have a look. Form, execute this one. Okay, so here is the body of the request, this part. And here is the header of the request. Okay, so we have lots of things. We have host, accept, content type, origin, plenty of information here, okay, which is in the header. We're going to learn about cookies next week, so we will see what this means. There is information about the browser, about my operating system, information about my, gives a lot of information about my PC, content length, here is the URL, and you may not have to use the get header method for your web applications, but if you need to do some debuggings in the future, this might be helpful. Okay, so let's go back to the slides and take a look at some of the other methods. These, so this is an HTTP method as it is. We have the name of the method, right? And then we have the path to the resource on the web server. Down here, because this is a post method, we have the body. This is what we displayed first in our program. These are the steps to do what I just did. And we also looked at the get header methods. We saw how to retrieve the header information, which is the top part of the HTTP method. As you saw, we had keep alive. Cookie is not displayed here. Maybe they had displayed the cookie for this example. We also saw this. So basically, these things on the left, host colon, user agent, accept language, accept encoding, and so on. These ones are the header names, and these ones are on the right are the headers or header values. Okay, so it's like a map. It's like it's like a map. There's a name and a value. There are other things, headers, header names, int header, date header, that we don't actually look at, but there are plenty of methods related to header. If you want to use it, you can give it a try and see the purpose of each one. If you want to practice at home, you can see the list of the API. So this one is the example we just looked at for retrieving headers. So I'm going to pass through it quickly. We don't need that information. The next thing we want to discuss is HTTP servlet response. Okay. So with HTTP servlet response, again, let's take a look at the interface first. We have on top, we have an interface, and then we have HTTP servlet response. Add cookie, add header, encode URL, send errors, set status, send redirect. Mostly we have used the get writer so far just to display something to the browser. But we want to look at other methods today. Here's the web architecture from first week. As you can see down here, there is an example of a response stream. With response stream, we have a status code, content type, and then we have all the headers. And here is the request from the client, okay, which goes through HTTP, TCP IP network until it gets to the web server. So if you print the response stream on the browser, it will look like this one. You have plenty of headers on the left side, and then all the headers will have some value, which gives a lot of information. So with response, you're actually giving a lot of information back to the client, and also giving the response body, which is usually an HTML. If you use inspect elements, if you're using, let's say if you have a Chrome, you can use inspect elements and see the response object, see the response stream on your browser. The other way to do it is to use Java to basically print the response on the browser. So mostly we use response to send data back to the client. Okay. Some of the two very widely used methods are set content type and get writer. And after using these methods, we basically just do simple I/O to write HTML or something else to the client. There are other important methods, such as sending errors and adding cookies, the methods that allow us to send errors and add cookies that we will take a look at after the 10 minutes break. Okay, so let's have a 10-minute break. We'll come back and we will see more about the response object. 10 minutes break.